Hey everyone, welcome to an extremely important app hack that we'll be discussing today. Now this hack's been proven to boost your iPhone app downloads by 128% on average, so it makes it a must-have. Let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, I want to let you in on a little secret, and that is that marketing for relevancy is the shortest path to success. Now what I mean by that is that as human beings we tend to care about the things that are relevant to us. For example, I love app marketing. And I love it because as an independent app developer, marketing plays a crucial part in determining my success or my failure on the App Store. It's incredibly relevant to me and so I care about it. Someone who's a mechanic or professional athlete probably doesn't feel the same way that I do about app marketing, and the reason for that is because app marketing has zero relevance in their lives. So be relevant to your target audience. If they're shown something they care about, they'll be interested in your product. In this lecture, we're going to discuss one of the most basic ways of making sure that you're relevant to your users, and that is language. Let me ask you a question real quick. How many of you would download this app? Now in the Chinese App Store, this app's a top seller, and at the time of creating this lecture, it was actually being featured by Apple too. We can see from the reviews that people like it, the screenshots look nice, the icon's pretty. By all accounts, this app should be a hit. But there is one problem. If you don't speak Chinese, you have no idea what this app does or what it's for at all. I don't anyway. Now this could be the greatest app ever made, but the language barrier is preventing me from seeing that. After all, how can something ever be relevant to me or grab my attention if I don't understand it? I'm not going to download this app, and neither are most people who don't speak Chinese. Now, the App Store is available in over 155 countries, and chances are that you've allowed your app to be sold in all of those countries, since that's usually the default setting when you submit your app. But so what? For example, Brazil loves soccer, or I should say football, I guess as it's called over there. But let's say you've made an awesome soccer app that you're selling. By all accounts, it should be a runaway hit over there, but if your app and its keywords and description are in English, you won't, and I'm going to tell you why. Take a look at this blue box here. Let's go ahead and say this blue box represents all the iPhone users in Brazil. Now, we have another box below it, and this box represents the number of people who actually come across your app in the App Store. But guess what? You've left your app description and everything in English, so now we have to make a smaller box. And these are the people who have found your app, but also understand English, so they know what you're saying. Now they also have to like soccer, otherwise your app is of no interest and irrelevant to them, and so our box gets even smaller. And finally, this last box represents the people actually impressed enough with your app's screenshots and descriptions that they hit the download button. So to sum it up, even though Brazil loves soccer and you have the best soccer app out there, you've made it so people who download your app, they have to find it, they have to know English, they have to like soccer, and you've got to convince them enough to actually download your app. And it's not going to be very many people. So do you see the problem here? By not localizing your app into Portuguese, you first of all have made it very hard for people to find you since people aren't going to be using your English keywords to search. This makes the blue box of people who find you a lot smaller, which in turn makes all the boxes below it smaller as well. Also, you've added a whole nother condition to your funnel. Now the people who people who find you, they also have to know about English to even see what you're saying. And it's going to be a lot smaller box, which is going to result in smaller and smaller numbers of people who download your app. In marketing, we call these boxes funnels. Now keep in mind that long and skinny funnels are bad, short and wide funnels are good. And right now, because you didn't localize, your funnel's looking pretty long and skinny. So if you want your app's funnel to be wider and shorter, which will result in getting you more downloads, you should be localizing your app. Now, if you localize your app for all the top countries, you'll be making your funnel shorter and wider in all those countries too, which will also greatly increase the downloads of your soccer app. These two pie charts show the breakdown of the downloads and revenue in the App Store by country. If you look at the chart on the left, you'll see that a lot of the apps in the world are being downloaded by non-English speaking countries. In fact, I believe that number stands at roughly 50% about. Now localize for the other half and reach them in a way that will be relevant, and it will result in more downloads for you. Destimo.com's created an excellent report on the effects of localization for an app, which I'm going to attach to the end of the lecture here, so be sure to give it a look when you're done here. Perhaps the most powerful statistic they give in there, though, is that localization increases downloads on your iPhone app by 128%. This is huge. Let's talk about the do's and don'ts of translating your app and its metadata for other countries for a minute. First, don't try and do the translations yourself. As a rule of thumb, always use a native. Your friend Dave might have spent 6 months studying abroad in Italy, but to truly speak a language fluently, it takes years to master it, so use someone who's mastered it. There are a lot of great translation services on the web. I usually use icanlocalize.com. You just upload your .strings file to them, and they notify translators who then apply to translate your project. Typically, there's 2 people assigned per language, one person to translate and the other to proofread. The translators are generally very good. The pricing is reasonable. You can do a lot of cool things like set string length limits on translations so you don't end up with a sentence that's 200 characters longer than the original one. Again, there's a lot of other service options out there, so feel free to shop around on what you want to use to translate with. Now second, don't just copy and paste into Google Translate. Now despite what some people might tell you, Google Translate's not perfect. With Google Translate, they maybe might be able to understand what you're trying to say, but there's still going to be a lot of errors and a lot of things that get lost in translation. Remember, you're not just trying to be understood by people, you have to convince them to buy your product. So don't be afraid to put just a little more time and effort into it. Use a native. Now even if you have no intention of localizing your app, I still highly recommend that you use NS localized string instead of NS string. It's much easier to localize. It's a lot easier to go back and gather out the NS localized strings than it is to try and find every single NS string in your project and change it later if you decide you want to localize down the road. So save yourself some time and use NS localized string. And when it comes to gathering those strings out of your project, I highly recommend using GenString. Now this GenString, this snippet of code I have below, can be used in Terminal to scan the files in my Xcode project directory and stick them all in the strings file and place that file on my desktop. It's all ready to go to be localized and everything. It can save you hours from trying to find the strings and copy and paste them into the file yourself. In the code snippet, the highlighted green parts, those are the parts that you'll probably need to change to match your own project. When you localize an app, it is much easier and more efficient to focus on localizing strings than to try and localize images or storyboards. So if you have an image that has text on it that needs to be translated, consider moving the text from the image and just using the blank image and put a UI label with your text on top of that instead, and set the UI label in your implementation file in like a viewed load method. This is going to be much easier than trying to recreate a dozen copies of the same language localized, and it's also going to help keep your app lightweight and keep you from sticking a bunch of image resources in there. Likewise for your nibs and storyboards. Try to avoid creating separate localized instances for each of them, because this turns into a real pain down the road when you're trying to make a change that occurs in all of them. You want to avoid doing this. Now, if you can't avoid localizing your storyboards or nibs like you see here, what I recommend, and this is just my personal preference as a programmer, so take it how you want to, what I recommend is to save localization for the absolute very last thing that you do. Once you're ready to submit, then go ahead and create a master backup copy of your project that's not localized, and take your other project and localize it to your heart's content and submit that project. Now when you do an update, go ahead and grab the master backup copy that you saved earlier and use that for your update. It should be exactly like the version you just put on the store minus the localizations. Now you'll have to add them back in again, repeating the process before you submit, but it's a lot easier than trying to work with a dozen different instances of your storyboard when you're doing a simple update. Again, it's just my personal preference, so don't feel like you have to take it at face value. Really, the best thing to do is to learn auto layout and constraints. Auto layout does a great job of addressing this issue, so you shouldn't run into a problem like this. Translation services can add up quickly if you let them. Don't use text or an icon don't use text if an image or an icon can get the same point across and can be just as effective. When translating your app strings and metadata, be sure to localize for the Big Ten. That would be the 10 languages that you see here, which are English, Spanish, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Chinese, Russian, Korean, and Japanese. These languages make up the majority of markets in the App Store. Again, it costs money to translate your app, so don't target a small or obscure language unless you feel like you have a really good reason to do so. Now, localization can be a bit challenging at times, especially if you've never done it before, but it can also pay off in a big way. Keep in mind when you localize, you stop being a one-country hit and you become a company that is international. This goes a long way to strengthen your brand, and it also makes you more attractive to potential buyers if you ever decide to sell your business down the road. Now, we haven't touched much on how you localize your app. There's a lot of excellent tutorials out there about it. Writing our own tutorial would basically be reinventing the wheel. For a great tutorial on how you localize your app, though, I recommend this one by Ray Wenderlich and his app tutorials team. Those guys do a fantastic job of explaining it all in detail, and they're easy to understand. So be sure to visit the link at the end of this lecture here. I've put in the bonus material. Go ahead and visit it and take a look if you want to brush up on how to localize your application. Thank you again for listening. Go ahead and get out there and start using an incredibly powerful app hack that's going to make a big difference for you.